Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of comics like Avengers, Punisher, and their recently launched Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. It's Jason Aaron. Thanks for coming on, Jason.
How's it going?
It's going well. How's your day going in the plant metropolis you're currently living in?
Yeah, my office is kind of full of plants. I mean, like 2 years ago, I had no plants. Now I've got, I think, like 30 just in this room where I work every day.
Yeah.
Maybe it's being stuck home for a while. I just wanted to fill my house with things that, made oxygen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it also gives it a good feel to it. I mean, you like tiki bars too, right? I feel like tiki bars often have greenery and stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I've got a big bird of paradise plant over here. So kind of building my own home tiki bar, I guess.
I also appreciate, for listeners that don't know, which is 100% of you because this is an audio podcast, Jason has a Hey Kids comics spinner rack behind him. I have the same one right over there. It was from Jim Demonakos' one. I don't know if that's where you got yours too.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Are those all your books that you put in there?
Yeah, this one's, I got a 2-spinner rack household. So this is the upstairs one, which is sitting right behind my work desk. So yeah, it's covered with books I wrote. And then I got one downstairs in the basement, sort of in my comic book library room that's covered with books I bought off the spinner rack when I was a kid. A lot of George Perez stuff, a lot of, mid-'80s DC books, Mutant Massacre, Craven's Last Hunt, all that stuff.
I think it's kind of fun. With my one, it's a mix of, it's just basically like personal stories behind all of them. Some of it's like the first stuff I bought when I was a kid. Some of it's like, like the first comic I bought when I first started coming back into comics after I took a 3-year break. It was Infinite Crisis #4. That was the one that got me back in, of all things. A wide mix of it. And then also a bunch of like first appearances of characters I really love, and they're all weirdos, like Stiltman and MODOK and like Bova, the cow woman who raised Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch.
Sure.
Everyone's got a story for their spinner racks.
I love it. I love spinner racks. They make me happy. I mean, because to me, like that's how I got into comics, right? Like I came up in the age of the spinner rack. And so I still get excited when I see one packed full of comics.
Yeah. Well, we're here to talk about Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. But before we get into that, I did want to discuss kind of your year, because I feel like this has been a crazy stretch for you. We talked previously for my feature on Jane Foster, Thor, about how you'd been involved with the production for Thor Love and Thunder and how Gore and Jane Foster Thor reached the big screen in Thor Love and Thunder. I also love that Gore also like showed up a second time in Werewolf by Night, but like kind of like the comic version on a wall.
Right.
You launched a big swing of an original comic in Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. You just did a big interview with CBR about your long-standing Avengers run and how it's kind of entering its climactic period. You've been redefining the Punisher. Your Alabama Crimson Tide have actively tried to both make and not make the college football playoff.
Why you got to throw that part in there, David? Like, why?
My wife is a Texas Longhorns fan, and their loss to Alabama this year, I feel like, was the moment where the year just started falling apart for them. But every year it's like that for Texas.
Well, I felt it was the point where the year started falling apart for me too. But
yeah, there you go. But do you feel like things are normalizing a bit now for you, that Once Upon has launched, you've kind of entered that end phase for Avengers, and the Tide are doing their best to sneak into the playoffs. They're at 6 now.
Right. Yeah, I don't think they're going to make it in there. But I mean, the big thing is who the fuck knows what normal means anymore, right? Like, right. I think for me, Once Upon a Time is a big part of this. For me, these last few years have really been about refiguring everything, right? Like in terms of my personal life, my career, just reevaluating where I'm at, where I'm going. And that kind of, turned into a period of big radical changes. So yeah, I think it's an interesting confluence that I get Once Upon a Time, the End of the World #1 coming out, and then the next week, Avengers Assemble Alpha, which is the first part of the end of my 5-year Avengers run, and really even more than that, like I think an end of 17 years of me doing ongoing Marvel comics. So are things getting normal? I don't know. I think I'm still in the process of figuring out what that new normal looks like. Like a lot of things have changed for me work-wise the last few months. Like I'm working on a book this week that's first issue of a brand new thing. I've been doing that a few times lately. I'll be working on issues of a couple of other creator-owned works later this month. So it was just a lot of new stuff, while I'm kind of wrapping up some of the existing stuff. So it's still, I mean, so I guess that is the new normal, is just
Change.
yeah, just sort of change and being open to new possibilities and so I mean, I say all this in a way where none of that's negative. I mean, of course, like what kind of got me to that point, or got all of us to that point of shutting down and reevaluating everything was very, very negative. But for me, the things that have come out of that have all been very exciting and positive.
It is interesting to kind of look at your workload right now. I was debating as to whether or not this felt dramatic or like me reading too much into it, but it kind of feels like you're at the culmination of something. It's not that you don't have other things to do at Marvel. Like you could write you could write a killer Stilt Man run. I mean, I don't even know what a Stilt Man run would look like. I don't even think that exists. Somebody's just Chip Zdarsky is probably listening and just being like, David, how dare you keep talking about Stilt Man all the time? But at a certain point, it sometimes feels like when Bendis was kind of heading out to DC and everything, it kind of felt like he'd crossed all the bridges that there were available to him. And I'm not saying that you're necessarily there, but it does kind of feel like I said, you're at a culmination. And I mean, it sounds like you don't even really know what that means. Or maybe I'm just making that up. I don't know.
No, I absolutely agree with you and absolutely feel that way. But I mean, I mean, I do know what that means. Again, there's some parts of that I can talk about, and some I can't, just yet. But I think, yeah, I mean, I've been at Marvel. I mean, I won a Marvel Talent Search contest 20 years ago at this point, right? And I've been doing full time, ongoing books at Marvel for about 17 years, I think. So yeah, I think I've definitely hit the end of wanting to do that, really of wanting to do ongoing work for hire series, period, at least for the time being, for the foreseeable future. I kind of want to get off that train. But, the comics have changed a lot. The situations have changed a lot from when I first started, even from, when Bendis went to DC a few years ago. So the landscape looks different. So I am not um, looking to go from being Marvel exclusive to being DC exclusive or anybody exclusive.
You're looking to be Jason Aaron exclusive.
Right. I think, again, like I've said, from these last few years, I think we all had to stop in some way or another and just reevaluate our relationships and what was important to us and where we wanted to put our time and energy. And I've done that in my personal life and my work life. So right now, I am excited about being able to be open to a lot of different work
Mm-hmm.
possibilities. Most all of them in comics. I'm still not looking to jump outside of comics too much, but um, I am happy to be able to kind of choose from a plethora of stuff, and some of that stuff I'm already starting to work on. Some of it I'll get to next year, but yeah, I think as part of that, there definitely is some kind of a culmination. I've known that for a while. I've kind of been talking about that or alluding to that for a while without coming out right out and saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And that, this Avengers story I'm doing is not just about culmination of, 60 plus issues of Avengers. It's got stuff that goes back to, the first ongoing books I ever did at Marvel, to Ghost Rider and to the Wolverine stuff I did and a lot of Thor stuff. So I'm kind of pulling threads from a lot of signposts along throughout my entire Marvel tenure and tying them up in this one story.
You gotta find a way to bring Brew and iBoy back in.
Yeah, I had Brew pop up at one point in Avengers, but yeah, I haven't written iBoy. It makes me really happy to see him, when he was still popping up in other X-Men stuff. I love iBoy.
I guess Brew was running like the Agents of Wakanda, wasn't he? He was kind of like the dude who was running like Avengers Mountain.
Yeah, he was their tech guy.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting. So, like I said, we're mostly here to talk about Once Upon a Time at the End of the World, your new Boom series that will be drawn in succession by Alexander Tefenki, Leila Del Duca, and Nick Dragata. Before I get into my question, I'll do a quick solicit for number one. It just came out. It's about in this epic post-apocalyptic tale. Maceo and Mezzi have never met anyone like each other, and they'll need all the help they can get to survive a planet ravaged by environmental catastrophe. This epic trilogy, each issue overflowing with 30 story pages, spans a lifetime as philosophical differences tear at the threads holding Maceo and Mezzi together. Will they and the earth beneath their feet ultimately be torn apart? It's a really interesting project, and it kind of connects to something you said before, where you said that it's not that if the perfect ongoing came up, maybe you'd be interested in it. One of the things I find really interesting about this is the fact that, like, I had Ed Brubaker on the podcast 2 weeks ago, and I described it to him, your book, as it almost seems like a maxi series made of miniseries, because there's like the 3 distinct 5-issue arcs that are drawn by Alexander, Layla, and Nick. And they tell dramatically different periods in Maceo and Mezzi's lives. Do you just find yourself drawn to kind of the more finite stuff right now because you've been living in that one flavor of ongoing for so long, and you kind of want something that has that, in this case, very literally a beginning, middle, and end?
Absolutely. Everything you just said. I mean, that specific journey of Once Upon a Time at the End of the World has been a long one. It's kind of an idea I had years ago. First, it was just, well, these 2 kids meet, and it's just a story about these 2 kids in the wasteland. Then at some point, over the years, I thought, no, I should do about them as old people. And it was really in the last few years I realized, no, I think it's them as kids and them as old people, and there's a part in the middle. That all kind of came into focus during the pandemic years. But absolutely, in terms of like structure, I think really the Punisher book I'm doing is kind of one of the things that helped bring that into focus. Like I love Tom King's stuff, especially his books with Mitch.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading one of those. I can't remember which one it was, maybe Strange Adventures, and got to the end of it, and I was like, that was a really good meaty comic, and was like, how many pages was this? And went back at it, it was like 26 pages, and I just realized like I want to do that. I want to do more. Like I need a little more room sometimes. And Punisher was a perfect book for that, and that it absolutely needed 30 pages an issue because there's present day stuff, there's flashback stuff. And so to help schedule wise, we brought in 2 artists. We got Jesus Saiz and Paul Azaceta both working on that.
It was ridiculous. They're insane.
They are. They're really, like, they make really, really, beautiful music together, I think. Like, I've been really, really proud and happy of how that book's been going. And the process of writing it has been, for as incredibly dark and weird as it is, it's been a very joyful process for me, like working on that book. So because of that, I knew like, okay, like Once Upon a Time is also going to be 30 issues. With this one, we'll take it up a notch where we got 3 different artists, like they're each working on their own arc, but also there'll be issues where, we'll have 2 or 3 of them working on the same issue. So things will kind of weave together at times, which kind of makes it significantly more complicated from a planning and a writing standpoint. But I've been thoroughly enjoying that process as well. It's intimidating at times. Like I think it's another one of those books that's hard to talk about. It's hard to really tell you what it is. Like you kind of just have to let it go and see as it unfolds. Because when we get to that issue 6, that Layla's drawing right now, it's a completely different kind of story than what you got in this first arc. You really don't have any clue exactly what's coming. You get a little tease of sort of the third volume and what the kind of stuff Nick will be doing, but that second one is completely different beast, and one I'm like equal parts excited and intimidated by, of just not wanting to fuck it up.
Mm-hmm.
But Layla is great, and working with her so far is going really, really well, just like it is with Alex on the first volume. So I think, yes, absolutely, I'm interested whoever I'm working for, whether it's creator-owned stuff or stuff for Marvel or anybody else. I'm interested right now in doing things with a set number of issues, specific artist or specific couple of artists, and like I said, kind of jumping off that ongoing train.
I think the 30-page part is very interesting too, because I think for a lot of readers, you would think that it's like, oh, what's the difference between 20 pages and 30 pages? 10 pages. That's it. But the thing is those pages afford you a lot of opportunities you wouldn't get normally as a storyteller. Like, I think a good example of this, and I don't know if you would agree with this, is something you would cut or not cut, but in the first issue, there's the action figure cutouts of Maceo and Mezzi. I don't even know if that's how you describe it, kind of what it feels like. It's like
That's how I described it in the script.
yeah, the action figure cutouts, like that's the type of thing that you'd probably have to cut with 20 pages because you just they don't add in theory to the narrative, they add to the feel and the understanding of the character. But with 30 pages, you get a little bit more room to work. And I think that you can really feel that in the first issue because you really start to understand these characters. You can have a montage of Maceo rolling around showing these crazy rooms that he has in his tower and like what's the one the room with all the pillows? Is it the soft room? Was that what it was?
No, it's the
safe room. That's it. I knew it was four letters and S, but you can have those.
Soft room would have been good too.
It would have been, yeah. It seems like those 30 pages are almost as meaningful as that like 15 issue finite nature where it's condensed, but it's also more simultaneously.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think every story needs 30 pages an issue.
Right.
I mean, I think it's very much about what works for the story. I think it absolutely does. You're right. I think if I had to take that and do a 20-page issue, the first thing we're going to lose are a lot of the visuals. And you see more of that as the book goes. I'm thinking of like issue 3 and just having the room to do big visuals, which sometimes you lose if you're just trying to pack a bunch of beats in there and you only 20 pages goes quickly, With this, a big part of it is the landscape, the setting, their interactions with it, whether that's Maceo's tower or the, crazy shit we're going to see them encounter when they get out into the wasteland. Like I wanted to have room to do that. And so those 30 pages just feel luxurious, and yeah, you're right. I think that, like, to me, that action figure page that you're talking about, it is important narratively because that's like a moment. It's like a beat when they kind of look at each other in silence there and
size each other up.
Right. And that page is, kind of represents like just them seeing each other for really in a big moment for the first time. Certainly for the first time where Mezzi kind of takes a beat and looks at this weird fucking kid and sees him maybe in a different light. And so I think it kind of drives home just that quiet little moment, with this one little page and also showing that we're going to do different things visually just to shake things up, going forward in the book. You'll see more little moments like that, sort of different things in each arc to kind of just be more interesting visually.
Maceo carries an ill-advised amount of lollipops for a person living in an apocalyptic wasteland.
He does. Clearly he's got a big stockpile of candy somewhere in that tower.
I imagine it's in the orchard.
Right. Yeah, it's like his orchard of vending machines.
I love that it's called that.
Which that the candy part's probably very autobiographical in that I've got my home is there are various jars of candy like stationed throughout the house, a lot of jelly beans, airheads. My son likes gummy bears. So we got some like Willy Wonka shit going on in our house.
Oh, I'm with you. My parents thought that when I was a kid, I was too lazy to chew because I didn't like any meat.
You're too lazy to chew?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Anyways, I love Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, though. So, like, if you wanted to get me to eat anything, basically, bribery with Reese's Peanut Butter Cups was a really surefire way to do it. So, it's entirely possible I had not the best diet growing up. It was a Maceo-esque diet, if you will. But
well, see, but you turned out okay.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. But I do think that one thing that's really interesting about this book is, have you seen Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda's The Night Eaters, the graphic novel they did this year for Abrams Comic Arts?
I have not. I love Marjorie and her stuff, though, but I have not read that.
It's very good. But in that book, it was the first comic that I could really think of that very directly referenced the pandemic within its text in a very specific way. There's masks, it's existing during this time, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the interesting thing about Once Upon is it's not overt and it's not literal like it is in the Night Eaters. But it is interesting to think about Macio's experience and how, like, basically the question is like, is he willing to go outside? Like, you could kind of think about it through that perspective. I don't know if you meant it like that, but it kind of felt like that. I am interested in, you said this general idea or some version of it existed pre-pandemic. How did the pandemic change this series as you were developing it and getting to the point of actual release?
Well, I mean that's a big question. Yeah, in terms of like Maceo not wanting to go outside, I don't think that was an overt connection on my part, but
I also don't blame him for not wanting to go outside. It seems pretty bad out there.
right. But I don't think you can overestimate like how much of that time and everything we were going through seeped into this book in a huge way. And I don't know how personal we want to get. I've said before this is a very personal story for me, but part of the other thing that shaped it in a big way for me is I got divorced during the pandemic. So I was one of, a skyrocketing number of people to have a COVID divorce, which is of course a very simplified way to look at your divorce, not like you got divorced because of COVID, but people who got divorced during the pandemic. So that played a huge part in kind of, again, like you get to a point where your personal life is going through a radical change. You have to stop and kind of reassess everything and decide where you go from there. And while also looking back over the course of your life and the story of a long relationship. Absolutely, that whole experience, all that stuff helped shape what I wanted the story to be.
Mm-hmm. You had a really good line in your newsletter about, I think it's a really great 2-sentence description of this. This is a story of love in a time of ruin and of how we move on from devastation. And it's really interesting to look at it through the prism of all of what you just said, but also just from reading the first issue. One of the things that surprised me about the first issue is, to some degree, I think it was maybe because like I was thinking of like The Good Asian with Alex's work and everything, and I was also kind of thinking of like the energy of the book. Going in, I was expecting it to be almost like Vertigo-like, but one of the interesting things about the first issue is it is kind of light. And I think a lot of it's because it's very Maceo driven. It's very much like his energy entering into this world that Mezzi lives in. And it does kind of remind me of that line that this is a story of love in a time of ruin and of how we move on from devastation. It just feels like, you're seeing an entire relationship and also like the world play out through 3 distinct points in their lives. And weirdly, I mean, I can't believe I didn't think of this before. It's kind of like a tactic you've used before to some degree, because like your Thor run, or at least the like Thor God of Thunder in particular, there's the 3 Thors from different eras. And like seeing how those 3 different eras kind of showcase the person and like the relationships they hold and the relationship they have with like their world and everything like that. A lot of that's here too, it seems.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know exactly what that connection is, but clearly that's a thing with me. I think of just wanting to look at in the case of Thor, like one character over the course of different eons, and this is looking at really one relationship over the course of 3 different periods. Clearly, I find that kind of thing fascinating for one reason or another. And I mean, in terms of the first arc, like you're saying, yeah, this it is lighter. Like this is ultimately, setting aside, it's the story of these 2 characters meeting and developing a connection, right? Like connection that doesn't, it's not just love at first sight. They see each other and click and fall madly in love. Like it's a thing that develops over time between 2 very different people. But just that idea of like when you add the setting in there, it's a terrible, awful kind of setting. It's the ruins of the old world. It's setting where everything you see or encounter is going to be looking to kill you. To fall in love in the midst of that setting, to like meet someone who you have such a profound response to, that really you can only see beauty in them in the midst of horrible ugliness, the entire planet reduced to horrible ugliness, but all you see ultimately is the beauty of this other person. To me, that's kind of the heart of this first arc. It's about falling in love, and that sort of can always just kind of make everything else disappear. And then, when we get to the second arc, there'll be very, very different sort of situation, very different kind of challenges. But yeah, with this first one, I'm definitely, I wanted it to have some Wes Anderson vibes to it, definitely. I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan. So one of the things when I first started thinking about this was like a post-apocalyptic story, in the Wes Anderson kind of universe. Like, what would that look like?
The action figure thing really fits the Wes Anderson vibe. I mean, like that's a very classic Wes Anderson thing where Wes always seems to like to kind of show inventories or repertoires and things like that to make sure that you kind of understand this character through what's on them almost, or like what they're wearing even.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's totally what I was thinking, and I think our kind of Macio's tour of his tower has a very Wes Anderson-y feel to me and look.
So those two were always the gateway, it seems, or maybe not specifically Maceo and Mezzi, but the idea of having these kind of opposites. Like Mezzi we meet her and she's having this solitary journey across a ruined landscape where she's like smashing crab monsters and eating them, and then Maceo is like excitedly jumping off a bed made of a billion mattresses, which, as you point out before we start recording, is a nice fairy tale reference, like the Princess and the Pea and everything like that. And I think that's like it's such a great introduction, but I am interested in what made this odd couple the right way into the story, or has this odd couple always been the story?
Yeah, I think I've known kind of who those characters were for a while, kind of through the different iterations of the story in my head. And it's very much the kind of story that began with character, really more than plot, right? Like some of the big plot stuff in the second and third arc, I really didn't have figured out until the last few years. Well, I've kind of had those characters for a long time, and I think I'm a better character writer than I am a high concept kind of plot guy. I think some of the stuff I felt best about over the course of my career when I've been able to find a character I can, get a hook in and just sort of spend time figuring out their voice and following them around, regardless of whatever the hell the plot is. So I think to me it's most especially this first arc is really about building these two characters. You gotten a glimpse of them so far, really more of a glimpse of Maceo than you have Mezzi. We don't really know much about Mezzi, or we just kind of know this tough. She seems very tough. She seems very used to surviving in the wasteland. So issue 2 and 3, we'll be learning a lot more about where she's from and really who she is kind of underneath that. So that's it. I mean, I think with any love story that you're trying to do, ultimately it's about getting you to like these characters, right? Like, yeah, you don't want to do the thing where two people meet and they just fall in love because, the writer says they need to fall in love. Like, you want to feel like these two people develop some kind of connection, that you see it happen and then you believe it. But I think to me, the biggest part of that is just like you as the reader like these people. You like hanging out with them, and you like them together. So if we can pull that off over the course of this arc, then we will have succeeded.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's the holidays, and Zoop is wrapping up the year with the completed Saucer Country Omnibus by Paul Cornell and Ryan Kelly, the Whistling Skull Special Edition hardcover by Tony Harris and B. Clay Moore, and several other amazing indie comic campaigns. Your support is greatly appreciated over at zoop.gg. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the checkout is easy and intuitive with this new crowdfunding platform. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. For creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop are the comic book crowdfunding specialists and are currently open for submissions. Simply email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start the process. And now, back to the show. Did you work with the other artists to kind of like define the look of what these characters are further into the arc? Because like when we first meet, well, I don't know if this counts as a spoiler. We get a glimpse of what Maceo looks like in the future. And what he looks like is, in my mind, he's got some East of West Archibald Chamberlain vibes from Nick Dragato, which makes sense because Nick did East of West. But he's been through some stuff. We'll just say that.
Right.
Was that something you worked closely with? Because it's like their relationship they wear it on their bodies to some degree. Actually, in the world, they wear the body on their bodies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, each artist got to design, the look of the characters for their time period. So I mean, it started with Alex. Alex did the first character designs for young Maceo and Mezzi, and then Layla came in and did the grown up adult versions, and then Nick did the old far future version. So each, I mean, even though it's a story where one arc builds on the one that came before, it's still very much a situation where each artist can bring a lot of themselves to their part of it, and not just in terms of those characters, but in terms of the world overall too, because the setting changes, the state of the world changes, over the course of those 15 issues. So I've been really, that's been one of the coolest parts, is just I've never done anything quite like this.
Hmm.
I mean, everything I do, certainly stuff I do at Marvel, it's all about taking existing characters and reevaluating them in some way or another. With this, we're kind of doing all that within the same book.
Could you have envisioned doing this with one artist, or was this more of a situation where you're like, I know that we have these different eras, so we need different artists to kind of define the visuals for each one?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think back in the years when I first kind of thought of this story as just a story about kids, I was just thinking one artist. But as I realized kind of the scope of it, I mean, it's an important, the fact that we have three different artists drawing this, I think is important to what the book is about overall,
Hmm.
right? Like it speaks to just how profoundly your life and your relationship kind of changes and grows over the course of a very long period of time. How much you change and grow, the world around you's changing. So we literally have, three different versions, three different worlds, kind of within the same story, with the same relationship threaded throughout it.
I absolutely thought my childhood was drawn by Jim Lee. I had no interesting Jim Lee like activities, but I absolutely thought my childhood was drawn by Jim Lee.
Did you have like a lot of Black Ops agents
I
in
can't
your?
talk about that, Jason, because technically I'm still that's all redacted. But let's just say
Gotcha.
there's a reason why I'm in Alaska.
That sounds like a whole other podcast.
It does sound like a whole other podcast. I did actually want to ask about the structure because there's two different ways you could do this. It could be 1 through 15, or it could be three minis with three number ones. How are you doing it?
I mean, it's my understanding we're doing 1 through 15. I mean, we're kind of looking at it as like book one, book two, book three.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, certainly you could do it the other way. I mean, really, that's kind of more, the up to Boom and kind of how they see it, which is a relation. This is my first time working with Boom's brand new relationship. Been going really, really great. Got nothing but good stuff to say about those people. It's a new relationship in terms of Boom, but Sierra Hahn, who's the executive editor over there, I've actually known for about as long as I've been in comics. She was at DC in the publicity department when I did my first book, when I did The Other Side at Vertigo years and years ago. So she and I have known each other a long time and talked for years about doing something together. And she was kind of really pushed me to help me bring this all together. And I can't imagine really doing this book with anybody else at this point other than her.
I have to admit that was my biggest surprise when I think it was Esther actually that emailed me about this originally and told me that this was coming, and I remember thinking I'm kind of surprised this isn't an Image. And I guess like it seems like it's more of like a relationship reason as to why that it ended up at Boom instead. Also, like I imagine that they have advantages that other publishers don't have.
Absolutely. The relationship was first and foremost, and that I wanted to do this with Sierra. At the same time, I was very open to working with Boom. Like I don't think you can argue against the track record they've had these last few years. So I was already interested from that perspective. But with this book in particular, yeah, I wanted to do it with Sierra, and she really wanted to make it happen. Um, and that has nothing to do with Image. Like you will continue to see me work with Image. Like I've working on stuff that should be coming out through Image. So, again, sort of like I'd said before, I'm sort of looking to expand beyond, just the companies and places I've worked at in the past, and really sort of the sky's the limit in terms of where I could go and what I could do. And that excites me. Like I've talked before, like I'm a guy who's just into a lot of different shit, right? Like the stuff I read, movies I watch, comics I buy, I kind of buy stuff from everybody. I don't like just one thing. I don't want to do just one kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I'm dead and you look back over the course of my career, I want it to be a lot of different stuff, like a wide variety of comics. And I want to continue to find things to do that are different than what I've done before. There's some characters I'll return to or genres that I'll return to, as long as I have something to say. But I mean, I feel like Once Upon a Time certainly by the time it's done, is going to be very, very different than any kind of comic I've ever been a part of. And that gets me really excited, and I want to do more stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to a creator recently where they described the reason why they kind of work with multiple publishers is because they want to they described it as a balanced breakfast. I also see it as you don't have too many eggs in one basket, but also I bet you learn a lot by taking projects to different places, like different ways you could approach your own work, different ways that you could promote your own work. I mean, that's one thing that Boom is really good at is Boom is really good at launching books. Part of that is through a very smart handling of variants in a lot of ways, but also part of it's their promotion. They're very good at promoting stuff. And I imagine that every time you take a project to a different place, you learn a little bit, not just about how to tell your story, but also how to kind of get your story out there and to get in people's hands and stuff.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. I mean, I've been very happy at Marvel and Image and the stuff I've done there, especially Marvel. I've been there a long time, have a lot of good relationships with people that I think will continue to be good relationships going forward. But I think one of the points of this book of Once Upon a Time is like be open to kind of new relationships when they pop up in front of you, right? And I think you don't want to get just because you're happy in a place, just sort of get locked into this is the only place where you can be happy. You absolutely should be open to other kind of relationships, publishing, creative relationships, especially when you're talking about creator-owned stuff. To me, it should always come down to those relationships, right? Like these are different comics than if you're doing work for hire stuff, and that I need to feel like there's a relationship, some kind of personal relationship in there somewhere when you're doing something that's so much more personal. So yeah, I think absolutely, and just learning, like you said, different perspectives on how to launch books, all that kind of stuff. I'm excited to continue to learn in that way and get better and change what I do and do new shit.
You're starting to sound like Maceo over here. I like it.
Am I?
Finding new things. Yeah.
I do. I probably have a lollipop in my pocket if I look. I do have on like Don Rosa McDuck family tree pants that I bought at Disney World.
I don't know what your bed situation is, but I'm guessing there's a lot of mattresses on it.
There's not a lot of mattresses. There are Prince sheets, though.
Oh, there we go. I like it. I did want to say that the covers, sometimes it can feel like covers exist for the purpose of having more covers.
Sure.
But in this book's case, having Mike Del Mundo on the main covers feels very right, especially because you worked with him on Thor before. I don't know if he'd really done Boom stuff before, but I like that he's on there because it feels consistent. Like it feels like something that would fit your work really well. And also he's just the best. He's just unbelievable.
He is.
But also it's like, I mean, all the covers on there, like I really like Alex's first cover. Like his one, there's a lot of character and life to it. It feels like there's a really smart approach to that. Is that the type of thing that working with Boom affords you where they kind of develop that stuff, putting the groundwork to put those cover artists together? Or was part of that or all of that you?
No, that I can take credit for none of that. Like that's very much all Boom, all Sierra and Allison, the editors on the book.
I was thinking Mike might have been part you, but I guess not.
Well, I mean, we talked about, just in general, like who should we look at for cover artists? And I have nothing but positive things to say about Mike. I think he's been one of the best cover artists in comics for years now, and having worked with him and gotten to see that, up close and personal on multiple books. Like I know, like he's the guy. He'll send you, 4 different ideas for one cover, and you're like, oh shit! Just it's a shame that we would only pick one. Can you just do all four of these? Like all four of these are so completely different and amazing. So he's great. He's doing the covers for the first arc. Then, as the interior art changes for the second
Oh,
book, we'll have a different cover artist as well. So you'll see three different cover artists, but along with the interior artists kind of doing their own covers, just like you said, like Alex did for issue one. And I thought it was a really awesome group of covers of different artists, and that continues with the issues going forward.
the Peach Momoko one on the second one's really good too.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. There's so many times like books have other covers just because somebody said they needed to, and they don't really add anything, or they don't really take into account what is this book about? What are we trying to say? I haven't felt that way with the variants on this series, and I feel like Allison and Sierra have done a great job of making sure everything's kind of pulling in the same direction.
I definitely agree. Yeah, they look really good. I love that the cover artists are going to rotate too. I assumed that Mike would be doing all of it. This is one time where I'm actually kind of like semi glad that Mike's not going to be working on a book, because it'll be interesting to see who does the second and third arcs. But you kind of mentioned this before, but it's interesting looking at your career and like looking at the different types of stories you've told. And I think one thing, I think sometimes people look at you as a writer who does a lot of grizzled stuff for Punisher and Wolverine sort of reasons. But I also think that those people might be mischaracterizing or remembering Wolverine and the X-Men in particular, which it has a lot of light fun to it. I mean, actually, it's mostly light fun.
Right.
Do you feel like Once Upon a Time, in some ways, though, is like filling a space for you as a storyteller that you were missing, at least from your current mix? Like it's kind of scratching an itch you didn't know you needed scratched?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, one, it's just been a while since I've done a creator-owned book, right? Like it's been a few years. Even the last one I was doing, Sea of Stars, was like I was co-writing that with Dennis Hopa, so it's been quite a while since I've done a book that's just me writing.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a longer gap than I wanted, than I ever would like. I mean, I've kind of said from the beginning, no matter what I'm doing in comics, I always want to be working on my own stuff. So glad to get back to that. And again, there's more stuff coming, more stuff that I'm working on in terms of creator owned work. I was saying in terms of tone, yeah, certainly this first arc is more kind of lighthearted and maybe makes you feel like some of my Wolverine and the X-Men stuff. The tone of this will change and evolve as it goes. And this will be again some very different books, within one, really.
I feel like the epilogue very accurately shows that. It's a slightly different situation for the characters. I'm not going to say anything else.
Right. And I mean, it's an end of the world story, so you'd assume it maybe will get more violent at some point. That's not a big leap. That's not just what I'm talking about in terms of the changes in tone and
Oh,
subject
sure.
matter. And in particular, I'm thinking about the second arc. I've never written anything or never explored the kind of creative territories that we go to in that second arc, which, as I said, is the thing that has me so excited / intimidated and frightened, which I think creatively is a great fucking place to be, right? Like I've been doing this in some form or another for about 20 years. Like to be 20 years in and get to that point where you're like, oh shit, I've never really tried to do this before. Hope I can. Hope I don't fuck it up. I love feeling like that.
I mean, is that kind of where you always want to be, though? Like where you kind of want to be finding new places for yourself? Because, like, I've talked to creators where, to some degree, being uncomfortable is appealing in some ways because it means that you're pushing yourself in a different direction.
Yeah, I think because I think you never want to feel too comfortable, right? Like creatively. I think that always kind of leads to stagnation and ruin. So if you have to feel a little uncomfortable at times just to keep from feeling too cocky or too confident, it's not a coincidence that I think any creative person you talk to, whether it's somebody who is has found incredible fame and success or whatever they're doing, I think everybody has a bit of that imposter syndrome, right? Where you always feel like you have snuck into a party you're not supposed to be at. At some point, somebody's going to show up on your door and say, you can't keep doing this. You're not supposed to be doing this. I think because you need that, like you kind of always need that to push you. It's a mix of feeling, you have to feel a confidence just to begin with to write something and give it to somebody else and feel like it's worth their time to look at, right? Like that takes a certain level of confidence. But I think that comes with this like feeling that never goes away of just like, I can't believe I'm getting to do this. Like I'm just going to keep doing it until they take it away from me. I think you got to find the balance, somewhere in the midst of all that.
I also think that I mentioned pandemic being reflected in comics and stuff like that. And that can be manifested in a very literal way, like it was in that Night Eaters book I mentioned. But a lot of it too is being realistic about how these past few years have changed people. And I mean, speaking to what you went through, both personally and societally, there's like no way a person could go through that and not come out a little different on the other side. And it would probably feel wrong to you to not reflect that in your writing. And by nature, it seems like that should result in something new and scary and exciting and uncomfortable in the process.
Yes, absolutely. All of those things. I mean, I think that's the stuff I'm interested in creatively in terms of post-pandemic is just the emotional effects of it. I mean, this is a book, the idea came together in the midst of a global pandemic, and I'm writing a book that's set in post-apocalyptic times. But the setting, like I never throughout this series, we will never answer the question of what happened to the planet, right? Like
good
in terms of how the planet got ruined, like I don't really give a shit, like you see things here and there and you can put pieces together if you want. But it's not a story about that. Like I don't care. It's about the emotion, the effects that setting has had on our characters and continues to in different ways as they go forward. That's the stuff I'm interested in. So I think in real life, it's the same for me. Like I'm just still grappling with the emotional effects, of those years. As I don't think I'm too alone in saying that, right? Like I think so many of us are, and maybe we will for the rest of our fucking lives. Like maybe we never get to the point where you really get your arms around what those years did to us all in so many different ways. And again, some negative and a lot of them very, very positive, and like the new directions those things have pushed us into.
I've made way too many pop culture references in this podcast, but I'm going to make one more. Did you watch Station 11, the HBO Max series?
I have not. No, somebody was just telling me about that.
It's fantastic.
Should I or should I not at this point?
I highly recommend it. It's basically the story of like what happens after the world is destroyed by a pandemic. So needless to say, some people had mixed feelings about watching it. And it was interesting to see because a lot of it's about how art carries on 20 years after this pandemic has like kind of ruined the world. And it is kind of interesting to see things like that because it was written well before the pandemic, or the book that it's based off of by Emily St. John Mandel. And when it's adapted, though, it just feels so prescient and it feels like it's very much built from this moment in time. And I think that you can see a lot of that in Once Upon. I also want to say that I totally agree with your decision to not say what happened because it reminds me, I was going to reference, I think of two things when I think of the title of the book. I think of fairy tales and I think of Quentin Tarantino, of course, because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It also reminds me of The Golden Briefcase, where in Pulp Fiction, where it's like, there's no version of finding out what is in that briefcase that would possibly be more interesting than not knowing. And in the same way that, like, you don't need to explain what happened to the world because it's not about that. It's about these characters and that journey.
Right. I think we always make assumptions because we're used to stories where, post-apocalyptic stories where there is a reason, where there's a war or some sort of specific catastrophe or whatever. Like, you won't get that answer here. Really, the only thing that's important to understand and realize is that whatever happened to the planet didn't happen yesterday. Like the state of it has been the state of it for a while now. So Maceo and Mezzi are very far removed from kind of any semblance of civilization as we know it. They grew up in a very, very different kind of world.
Mm-hmm. The last question I have about this book is its title, Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. We are in an era of very long titled books. I have to ask,
We are.
was the main reason why you named it that so you could beat Al Ewing and Matthew Rosenberg with their similarly long titles? You beat them both by, I think, 3 words. So in your face, Al and Matt.
Like I get paid by the title
You
word.
got 10 words. That's pretty good. But I mean, it also fits the book perfectly because the fairy tale with the end of the world. It's perfect.
Yeah, I certainly those guys have, have emboldened anybody who wanted to do a really, really long title because I love both of those books by Matt and Al. I mean, to me, I don't. You said you think of Tarantino. I mean, I think of like Once Upon a Time in the West and Sergio Leone, and
Hmm.
like to me that just denotes not just the fairy tale component, but also this is going to be a big epic story, right? Like this is going to be a story that is going to take place over a period of time, and they're going to take you on an epic journey. So really more going for that. It's that, but in the end times.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's Bad Idea, and the Renegade comic book publisher is back doing their crazy antics. The latest includes putting a comic from Mark Waid and David Lapham, The First Supper, into a recent edition of Previews for Order completely randomly. Or it was the latest, until Bad Idea also snuck a new comic from Joshua Dysart and Kano, The First 7 Days, into the same edition of Previews. Don't worry if you missed it, because you probably should have, as it was hidden under the publisher named B-Side Press with fake creator names. That's how Bad Idea rolls, though, making notable comics with great creators in extraordinarily unusual ways. Keep your eye out for whatever's next with Bad Idea, if you can. And now, back to the show. Well, before we go, I did want to talk about some of your other work just a little bit. And particularly, you did an interview with CBR that went up right before we started recording that talked about kind of your end run for your Avengers, the 5-year Avengers run. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about your run is its length, particularly in the context of this era we're in, because, you're talking about how like finite stuff is more appealing to you right now. Finite stuff is more appealing to everybody right now. The number of finite books has skyrocketed compared to ongoings. Ongoings of a real length are pretty rare at this point, unless you're Batman or Action Comics or like any of like the kind of legendary books, if you will. Being the one who's been on a book for 5 years and has done like dozens and dozens of issues that sprawled across multiple titles and is like having this big crescendo and everything like that. Does that feel unusual from the inside, or does a long run like this just feel like anything else from a writing standpoint?
Yeah, it definitely does feel unusual. I mean, I think in terms of how it's gone with with the Avengers, it's unusual in just that my Avengers run has been Avengers number 1 through ultimately it'll be through 66.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote Thor for 100 issues, but that was over the course of 5, 6 different series, right?
Right.
Like you get 20 issues here, 20 issues there, 8 issues, whatever. Like the fact that I've been on this one book with consecutive numbering over the course of the entire run, that alone feels strange and unusual. Just being able to be on Thor for that long also felt unusual, and that's harder to do these days, just given the nature of things relaunching and changing. And at some point, if you're continuing to relaunch it, there's just a question of like, why are you still on this book?
Yeah. Yeah.
With Thor, I kind of always said from the get-go, like I kind of felt enough confidence in my place in Marvel where I was just like, I'm just going to stay here until you take it away from me or I'm done, like I just had the confidence to say, I think I can last until I tell my story.
Mm-hmm.
And Avengers has been kind of the same way. Like I realized at some point kind of what I was building towards and said like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking. I'd wrap it up. Yeah, I can't imagine when I'm going to turn around and do another. I mean, it's even more than 60 issues when you factor in the Avengers Forever stuff. I can't imagine when I'm going to do another thing like that. Maybe never. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it might be maybe never for anyone.
Right. Well, like we did 60 issues of Scalped Vertigo, and that was kind of I think the last Vertigo book to do that. That's back in those days, like everybody was trying to do 60, 70 issues of their Vertigo ongoing, right? Like that was the number everybody aspired to, and I was kind of we were one of the last to sort of sneak in there before that all went away. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just the guy who puts the nail in the coffin in that regard.
Why was that the number? It is interesting because you look at, I think Why Last Man was 60. Fable screwed everything up because it was like 150. I'm like, what the hell is going on there?
Right.
I think Unwritten was up there too. I mean, it was kind of interesting because there was a lot of books that were just kind of in that 60 to, I think, was Preacher 66? I think Preacher was 66. But yeah, it was, I always noticed it was always like 60. It just seemed kind of random.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that became the no. Nobody tells you when you go to Vertigo, like, all right, come up with your pitch for a 66 issue series.
You're like, how do I think it like that?
Right.
You know, I am interested in like when you're writing something like that, either Thor or like Avengers. I feel like maintaining momentum on a long run like that is a really interesting challenge. Is that something that even enters your brain, or is it just about thinking of story and hoping that energy keeps going?
I don't know that it has been something that's entered my brain. I mean, in some fashion, like I've been working at Marvel now for a long time. I'm kind of just that's just sort of the Marvel chunk of my workload, and sometimes that's been Wolverine, sometimes it's been Thor, sometimes it's been Avengers. You know, sometimes there are things I feel like I've been able to bring together more in the way I wanted to, other times not. So that might change, but still, it's all just kind of, I'm just doing this, that's just sort of a part of it. And I don't really, I guess, think about it of like, well, am I going to be able to sustain interest or momentum on this book or that book? I'm just trying to tell the story, right? Like, and this is the story, this is where it goes, this is how long it's going to take. What are people going to think of it? Who fucking knows, right? Like, certainly, like there've been a few times. I mean, I think working on like the Jane Foster Thor stuff, like we talked about before, I realized in moments like, oh, this feels really special to me for a lot of different reasons. So usually that means it will feel special to other people, but you never know. You don't have any control over that.
Also, like with the Thor stuff, if that taught you anything, it's that how people react initially will not necessarily define it forever. Sometimes people won't change, but it's like, your experience, and then also like when I did that interview with you in the past, I think I mentioned Dan Slott and how like when he did Superior Spider-Man, he told me that at the beginning people were so mad at him, and then at the end when Superior Spider-Man was ending and it was going back to being Peter Parker in Peter Parker's body, which is what a comic book statement I just made. Peter Parker in Peter Parker's body. Anyways, he said that the same people who were mad in the beginning were upset that they were going back to the old status quo. And like that's the interesting thing is like I imagine to some degree, especially when you're working on like Marvel or DC stuff, you have to kind of tune what people say out because like sometimes they don't even know what they really want.
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, I think you got to tune all of it out, right? Like nobody who's yelling at you on the internet or telling you that you're amazing, none of them speak for everybody, right? Like there's always such a diverse array of opinions out there. You may just the diversity may not be the loudest, there may just be one opinion that's the loudest. But I think to me, like none of it can factor into doing what you do. I think you just have to tell the story. People may like the story, they may not like the story, but I've never been in a situation where I felt like I need to change what this is because people don't seem to like it or people don't seem to get this. It can be frustrating at times if you feel like, like, oh, I don't know that people realize what this is or this is not landing in the way I wanted it to. But again, even that's hard to tell just from shit you see on social media, like, and I think it's only gotten harder and more difficult over the years as the people who are yelling, are usually the ones who seem to rise to the top on social media.
Yeah, yeah. I did want to ask about the Punisher just because, and you opened this up for me, so I'm going to use a word that you used, which I think is accurate. It is a very well-crafted book, but it is also very weird. You said that. I can say that.
I've heard you say that. Like what, why is it weird to you?
It has dudes in nice suits running around with Ares helmets on. I mean, it's like, there's like all kinds of stuff where I'm just.
That's the weird part.
And there's also like let's just say Frank's family is having a tough time, which is a really hell of a thing to say because they were previously dead. There's a lot of stuff going on where it's just like when I read it, I'm like, it's so well done, but other time or like it's not that like I'm turned off by it. It's just like I don't know if I've ever read a story like it. And it kind of makes me uncomfortable, but I think maybe in the end that's going to prove to be fruitful in the same way it's fruitful for you. Where I don't know, I guess if you're doing a story with these characters that have been around forever, you probably want to try to find new territory, especially when you'd written Frank before in Punisher Max, but that was never in continuity. I'm doing air quotes as if everybody can see it.
Right.
I think part of the thing is like I originally envisioned it as an effort to rehabilitate the character to work in Marvel today after I don't know what the best way to put this is. Let's say a trying few years for the character and the symbol that's on his chest.
Right.
Reading it, I'm not actually sure that that's the case because it feels like, I don't know, Frank almost feels more unredeemable or difficult to redeem than ever just because this is like, a lot of the backstory stuff. It's just kind of how Frank's always been, It's just like it's not just that his family was killed. Like when you first read The Punisher, it's just like you're like, oh, this is a response to like he wants to do things because bad people killed his wife and his family. I guess my question is like, what was your objective? Like when you pitch this and you're like, I want to tell this 12-issue story about Frank and about the Punisher and what he is in the Marvel universe. What was your goal?
My goal was to tell a cool Punisher story that I was excited to tell. Certainly, I pitched that the first time I brought it up in one of the Marvel retreats. We were literally having a discussion of should we still publish comics with this guy?
Yeah,
like what, and if so, what should they look like? And in the midst of that, I just said, I have a story, idea. I think can work within the confines of how we want this character to work, but never looked at it as like, hey, we have a Punisher problem. Let me solve it. Let me come up with the story that solves it. I don't think that's the way to write stories, right? Like mine was, I have this story that I want to tell. I have a lot of thoughts on this character, like I continue to be fascinated by this character. Really proud of the stuff I did on Punisher Max years ago. And this is like the next evolution of that. I like the fact that it feels weird and that it's not what you expected. I mean, to me, it's it is one of those you'll have to get to the end of it and kind of look back and see what you think of it, whether it all works or not. It is absolutely one of those books that's coming together in physical form to be the best version of what it could be. It does feel very fully realized for me, and I feel really happy and proud of how it is. I still have one more issue to write. I've written the next to last issue, which is, pretty powerful felt powerful to write. So, I think for me overall, this kind of speaks to Once Upon a Time as well. Like, I think the older I get, the more like when I go to the movies, it's easy to feel disappointed and feel like, okay, like right away, I see what this is. I know what this movie is. Like it can be an enjoyable version of that, but it's not going to surprise me. Then when though you have something like Everything Everywhere All at Once or
heck yeah,
or Nope for me this year felt the same way where you're watching it and you're like 45 minutes in and you're like, I don't know what the fuck this is. That makes me so excited. And I think I'm trying to do more of that in my work. And I think Once Upon a Time was one of those things where it's like I can't even really tell you what it is until we get further into the journey. You just kind of have to see how it goes. And I think Punisher maybe like maybe like that too. And to me, it's exactly what you said. It's a story about who this guy has always been. It was never meant to be something just because the symbol changed because of his status quo changes a little bit. It's not about, hey, let's take this guy and do something completely off the wall and new with him. I want it to be a story that speaks very much to like, this is what this character means. This is what he has always meant. Telling a story with some surprises in it. And, the other big part of it is to put his family through a different kind of hell, but to make his wife Maria a real character for once, and that she's always been a fundamental part of his mythology, but just as a corpse, in a grave.
right.
and to like bring her into that world in a yes, a strange way, and that continues to evolve over the course of the series. But to start to see like what would she make of all this? What is her place in this world? Now that she's actually alive in it, what is that relationship like? What was that relationship like in the past? Like the Punisher is both a profoundly, incredibly simple character, and I think a very, very complex character when you you break him down. And I think that is absolutely what I'm trying to show over the course of this book. Is he a good guy? Is he a monster? Has he been both from time to time? Like you kind of have to figure that out for yourself.
I love the like Ares' possessiveness of Frank. Like the fact that he's so disgusted by the fact that Frank, who he views as like a perfect encapsulation of the concept of war, probably accurately, has now moved on to become like this avatar of the hand. And it's really interesting to see that. And it kind of actually, I mean, it ties into, I think, one of the central reasons why I think the book is so weird. And I've admitted it. And I want to say, I think it's weird, but I like it. It's good. It's just like, I don't know if I've ever really read a Marvel comic like it because partially because of what it is, but also partially because I think I made, like Ares, the incorrect assumption that I knew what it was going in. And I imagine as a writer, it's not something you actively think about it, but it's always something that you're kind of competing against is what you're doing versus what people expect of what you're doing, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I can feel frustrated at times seeing people be angry about their perception of where a book is going.
Sure.
And, like well, this is terrible. I don't like this version. And I'm thinking, well, I don't either. I don't like that version either. Like that's why I didn't do that one.
Yeah.
At least be mad at me about what I'm actually doing, not like what you assume we're going to do.
It's very difficult to be mad about anything that's drawn by Jesus Saez and Paul Azaceta. And Dave Stewart colors, my God.
That's right. Yeah, it's a pretty stellar lineup we've got. Yeah, I think Jesus has absolutely killed it on this. Like he is gone to another level with the stuff he's done on this series. Couldn't be happier. And Paul is able to bring, like a grittiness and emotionality to those flashback scenes. Couldn't be happier with the art combo on that series and how it's all come together.
There is a very pervasive sadness to the book. And I will say, I really appreciate it because I've always thought Jesus Saez is one of the most underrated artists in comics. And like him getting a big show like this is great. He was previously drawing Star Wars, and I was briefly upset that he went off Star Wars because I really just wanted to see him on a big book. And then he got this, and I was like, I'm no longer upset. But I wanted to close with, it's actually just really a quick shout out for something, but it's a gateway into a topic. I'm sure you had to pitch the Punisher at a retreat. I had Tom Brevoort on recently, and he had to say this about you when I asked who the best person at pitching retreats was. He said, and I quote, I think that historically, probably the person who pitches the most effectively at retreats is Jason Aaron. And he went into why that is. And basically, it was like you have a real clarity of vision going in that people, it's like a lot of people are trying to sell it, and you're just saying what it is. And I thought that that was really fascinating. Needless to say, good job by you. Tom has heard what I have to imagine is a boatload of people pitch comics before, so being at least near the top is pretty impressive. But, for all the listeners out there, what's the secret? How do you sell the room?
Shit. No, I appreciate Tom saying that. Any compliment you get from Tom, they're like little precious jewels. You cherish them because he doesn't say that if he doesn't mean it. I felt really good about pitching in that room twice, say 3 times. One of them was when I went in to pitch my opening Thor arc, pitched the God Butcher stuff. Then the first time I pitched the death of the mighty Thor, and the third one was when I pitched this Punisher. And I think it was because I saw those stories so clearly in my head, like from the big moments to some of the most impactful small moments. I hate pitching. Like I've always felt like I am terrible at pitching. Certainly, I hate writing pitches. That's been like once I got to the point in comics where I could just call somebody up and, hey, can I just tell you about this? And I don't have to write it down. best moment in my career when that happened, because I hate writing pitches. To me, it's always just like, I would rather just do the thing. I don't want to sit down and like write the shorter, shittier version of the thing. Let me just go do the thing. You know, it's hard for me to do that without just going all in. And then I've got a, you know, I've written a novel. When you're trying to, if you're writing a pitch, you know, like just keep it to the point. So I think just that, like, understand you're not, you know, you're not writing the back cover copy on a paperback, right? Like, you're not trying to entice somebody. You're just like, just tell me what the thing is. I think I credit Axel Alonso for really helping me in that regard. And that, you know, Axel is kind of the guy who brought me into Marvel, and so much of my early Marvel stuff was either directly with Axel or through Axel. And I think that, like, you kind of realize, like, Axel tells you like how you need to pitch to him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just tell me, what is this thing? Like ABC, soup to nuts. What is it? Or like, where does it start? Where does it go? Where does it end? And don't get too lost in the weeds and the details along the way. Just hit the high points and the best parts. And I think that's what I've tried to do in that room. But yeah, I've seen people do amazing in that room, and I've seen people, you know, crash and burn. Like, it's a difficult thing to wade into. I think it helps to. I've been going to those retreats for
a long time.
Yeah, a very long time.
I'd probably just start crying. I would just start panicking and crying. I'd somehow find a Reese's peanut butter cup and just start eating it. Who knows what would happen? But
that's what it's like every time Hickman tries to pitch. It's just a lot of crying.
That is a perfect place to end it. Jason, thank you so much for coming on to talk about Once Upon a Time at the End of the World, Punisher, Avengers, everything you're working on right now. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Jason Aaron. You can find him on Twitter at Jason Aaron and his work in Once Upon a Time at the End of the World, The Punisher, Avengers, and more. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman, who stepped in and edited this podcast and is probably the reason why it sounds better than usual. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show on patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Brian, Matteo Ciccati, Chris Doré, Nir Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnston, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Ron V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Hoyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Norb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Brian, Submit Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwoods, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Challey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslam, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Chris Tal, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gibbs, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Dave Slusher, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinnell, Kent Hedelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, Dave Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Payson, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abbott, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Debonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.